I've seen a lot of memes about lore-accurate Link floating around the internet. I, of course, love them. It's really cool to see people who have mastered the game to the point that Link starts to come to life. It's definitely more interesting than my combat. It usually just turns into a Y-pressing simulator. That got me thinking though, how powerful is Link actually? I thought about it so much that I made a short out of it. I compared Link to different Links without any items and chose who I thought came out on top. A lot of people disagreed with me, and I mean a lot. But regardless, I was curious, so I made 2 more shorts to determine which Link was the strongest and which Ganondorf was the strongest. Every time I circled back to the same conclusion. Tears of the Kingdom has some of the most powerful versions of these characters that we have ever seen. It's not even close in a lot of cases. So hop on your hover bikes and grill up some Koroks, because today we're talking about power scaling. Before we can get anywhere near the end, we have to start with the beginning. In The Legend of Zelda on the NES, Link was already made out to be a fairly competent swordsman and adventurer. Shigeru Miyamoto imagined the Octoroks that Link fought to be huge monsters, bigger than the hero himself. Link fights moblins, darknuts, and dragons. He is obviously a very strong opponent and someone to be respected. Eventually, the second Zelda came out. This game allowed us to be directly involved in combat and showed the true strength of the foes that Link faces every day. It gave us a deeper respect for this crazy adventurer. Then A Link to the Past came out. The developers are now working with a more powerful console. The possibilities seem endless, so they do what anyone else would do. They make The Legend of Zelda again, but much, much bigger. There are more enemies, more dungeons, more items, and harder bosses. They made an insanely powerful Link, and I don't think they even meant to. By simply wanting to make a bigger and better game, they had no choice but to make this character crazy overpowered. This creates a problem though. With Link being so powerful, Ganon doesn't seem like much of a threat anymore. He cannot be the same Ganon we fought in the NES version. He has to be more intimidating, so the developers made a stronger Ganon, a final boss to be feared. Ganon is an enemy that, even with all of the equipment at our disposal, can kill us anyway. Already we can see the effects of power creep. Developers cannot allow for their game to be less successful than the previous title. They have to raise the stakes and stack the odds squarely against the player. This is all in an effort to make us, the player, feel like we are accomplishing something incredible. The next game that made its way to the Zelda series was Link's Awakening. This game is not nearly as daunting in scope as A Link to the Past was. The only reason this is the case is because of hardware limitations. After A Link to the Past, they introduced Aine of Time to the world. The developers couldn't make a Link as powerful as Link to the Past in this game, and this is simply the case when moving to 3D. Some enemies that used to be easy to slaughter by the dozens, like Keese, have now become a nuisance, and in some cases, even an enemy to be feared. When redesigning the game for 3D, it is much harder to allow the player to face troves of enemies without easily being overwhelmed, so they had to make this game grander than the last one in another way. To counteract an arguably less impressive Link, the developers made a much more impressive enemy, Ganondorf. They took advantage of the new style of storytelling and made the antagonist a human. This allowed for us to fear Ganondorf not only because he is powerful, but because he is smart. We see this showcased early in the story when he's trying to outsmart the king and enter into a treaty while he searches for the Triforce. We see it showcased 2 more times when he outsmarts the player. He tricks us into opening the Sacred Realm for him, and he tricks us later by making us reveal Zelda. This makes it feel very satisfying when we face off against Ganondorf at the end of the game. He was so smart throughout the whole game. He tricked us at every corner, but we still surprised him. The fact that he, the great Ganondorf, could be defeated by a 17-year-old is too much for him to handle. Ultimately, we were able to defeat a more impressive enemy even though we seemed less powerful, thus continuing to feed the power creep. Once Ocarina of Time was finished, it must have been quite a scramble to figure out what to do next. After all, we saw the results of Ganondorf getting the Triforce of Power. What could be more imposing than that? Let's try the actual end of the world. AGA Enuma must have been scared of the dark as a child because holy crap, this is the stuff of nightmares. After defeating an enemy that threatened to destroy the entire kingdom, it only makes sense that Link's next trial would be against a world-ending threat. The enemy has to be scarier than the previous. This is where the Zelda series went to Brandon Sanderson levels of conflict, where Link finds himself in the middle of a struggle between gods. He wasn't left powerless in the conflict though. By completing the quests offered in this game, Link is able to transform into a light-footed Deku Scrub, a powerful Goron, a graceful Zora, and a mighty giant. He gains the ability to move faster, talk to the dead, and become invisible. He becomes the powerhouse that we all imagine Link to be. And all of this is ignoring the most powerful tool in his arsenal, the Great Fairy Sword. Nah, I'm just messing with you. It's obviously the Fierce Deity mask. This mask is obtained after collecting every other mask in the game and transforms Link into a being of godlike power. He grows to a staggering height comparable to the King of Evil himself. He dons armor, which is notably the first time in the series we see Link wear anything besides his traditional tunic. He wields the double helix sword that deals the same damage as the Great Fairy Sword sword, but it also shoots beams of energy. Wearing this mask, Link is able to mow through the most powerful bosses that we face along our journey. Even the Majora's Mask, which has enough power to end the world, becomes a trivial matter to the Fierce Deity Mask. The only power that might rival this mask is the Triforce itself. The developers made the most powerful Link in the entire series basically on a whim. They really just liked the idea of transformation masks and ran with it. So how do you move on from this? After preventing the end of the world and fighting an enemy more powerful than Ganondorf, how do you raise the bar? I'll tell you right now that the Oracle of Games did not do it. The scope of their games was much less terrifying. It wasn't until Wind Waker came out that they were able to push the envelope and raise the stakes, just like how you should push the subscribe button. Wind Waker takes a very different approach. Instead of trying to create a new villain that is more powerful than Majora, they showed us exactly why we should be scared of Ganondorf to begin with. They showed us what happens to a world where there is no hero spirit to fight against Ganondorf. In the intro to Wind Waker, we are treated to the story of old Hyrule. When the seal on Ganondorf finally broke, there was no hero to stop him. Zelda sent Link to a different timeline, eradicating the hero spirit from this timeline. Because of this, Ganondorf was allowed to rain hell on Hyrule. The only way the people could counteract this was to pray for help from their gods. The gods could only devise one solution to help their people. They flooded the whole kingdom in an effort to stop Ganondorf. It was a desperate and insane plan, but they agreed that it was their only option, because what else could stop one as powerful as Ganondorf? Well, it seems like nothing could stop Ganondorf, because he survived. This reminder that Ganondorf was supremely powerful was very effective. The knowledge that not even the gods could stop this man serves to ingrain the threat of what we are facing. This knowledge makes it all the more satisfying when we are able to face off against Ganondorf. We play as Link, who has no relation to any of the previous Links. We go and inform the gods that we are in charge now. We don't need the hero spirit. We beat the gods into submission, claim the Master Sword for ourselves, and dredge up the Triforce from the depths of the ocean. When we face off against Ganondorf at the end of the game, it is with the knowledge that this is the one who made the earth tremble. This is the man who caused even the gods to fear him. And we win. Against all odds, we win. Wind Waker was able to raise the bar, not through crazy gameplay differences, but through an impactful narrative. We are never explicitly told, oh no, this is a really scary guy. We get to piece it together by ourselves. After the Wind Waker, we are met with 4 swords and Minish Cap. These games do not try to challenge the threat of the previous games, but serve to demonstrate that Link will fight whatever evil shows up whenever. This is the first time we are shown a reoccurring villain other than Ganon. Vaati doesn't compare to the power of Ganon in any way, but he serves to add flavor to the rest of the world. When Twilight Princess rolled around, we saw a completely different side of Ganondorf. While the Wind Waker decided to show the methodical side of Ganondorf, Twilight Princess chose to show the raw strength of Ganondorf. The way they did this, believe it or not, was by using Zant. We see that Zant is able to bring the kingdom to its knees with very little effort. He's obviously powerful and has resources that would make the ruler of any kingdom jealous. It isn't until later in the game that we learn that Zant draws his power from Ganondorf. When Zant first meets Ganondorf, his first assumption is that he must be a god. I don't know about you guys, but I've never met someone that was so impressive that I was like, yeah, that's probably Zeus. That's only the beginning of his power. When Ganondorf is sent to execution, he takes a magic sword straight to the gut. His reaction is to summon the Triforce. Let me put this into perspective. We know that the Triforce only reacts when people touch it. This is demonstrated to great effect at the end of Wind Waker. We learn in Aine of Time that if someone touches the Triforce but their heart is imbalanced, then it will split apart, leaving that person only with the piece of Triforce that most closely reflects their attributes. Ganondorf in Twilight Princess was so powerful that the Triforce was like, screw the rules, I'm going with this guy. I cannot state how insane of a feat this is. It might be the single most impressive thing that anyone in the series has done ever. This isn't the only place we see power creep in this game. Link in this game is probably the strongest we have seen him this far. Normally, what makes Link so scary is the fact that he rolls up to a battle in a fighter jet wielding the unmatched power of the sun and enough health potions to outlive the universe. This version of Link does obtain some pretty rad items, but that isn't what makes him impressive. Remember how I said earlier that Ganondorf is so powerful that he summoned the Triforce of Power and people immediately assumed he was a god? Okay, well take a look at this. This is Link locking blades with Ganondorf, the most powerful man alive, and winning. Link does not obtain a single strength enhancing item in the entire game. Link wrestles Gorons, he swings around a couple 100 pounds of metal, he goes fishing. Is there anything this man can't do? The fact of the matter is that while Nintendo continues to outdo themselves with bigger and bigger threats, they have no choice but to make the protagonist just as powerful. The next 2 games on the DS don't do anything to challenge the previous Zelda game. They seem more like filler episodes in an anime than anything else. Eventually, we arrive at Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword decides to outdo the other games by creating the source of evil presented in the series. Demise is nothing if not intimidating. He's huge and monstrous and literally on fire. He also presents one of the hardest boss fights in the series, assuming you're not a god at parrying like myself. The tension of the game is enhanced by the fact that the bad guys almost win, and Link only stops them at the very last second. The game also enhances our already high opinion of Link. In the previous games, Link fought Ganondorf. Ganondorf is one of the most powerful humans to exist, but he's still just a human. Demise is a literal demigod. Link not only faces down Demise, something Demise claims has never happened before, but he wins the fight in what might be the most climactic battle in the series. Link killed a god, something not even Hylia could do. Speaking of Hylia, Zelda also gets a huge leap of power. She is no longer the Sage of Time, but now she is also just straight up a god. This brings a new dynamic to the series by demonstrating that Zelda is not just some princess for Link to save, but a key player in the series. She finally lives up to the idea of being the one who wields the Triforce of Wisdom by demonstrating her ability to create a plan that outwits the antagonist. There's a huge gap in the Zelda games where we don't see stronger and stronger characters. There was a Link Between Worlds where we see Ganon again, but he's kind of just there for a cameo. Then there's Triforce Heroes, which takes a break from the Zelda formula altogether and goes for a goofy, lighthearted story. Eventually, we come to the 2 games that inspired me to make this video in the first place: Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. If you take all the journals and memories in the game and put them together, it paints a picture of Link that is absolutely terrifying. We learn that this guy was more skilled than most knights at 4 years old. I have a 4-year-old nephew. He eats dog food sometimes. Not only that, but Link also pulled the Master Sword at 13 and was appointed the Hylian champion at 17. He can destroy guardians with a pot lid, he can face off against dozens of monsters simultaneously, and he held Fort Hiteno by himself, destroying dozens of guardians with just a sword. He would have kept fighting until he died. He didn't stop fighting until he knew Zelda was safe. This is without question the most terrifying version of Link, and we haven't even seen him with Ultra Hand yet. In order to make Ganon feel like a threat, they give him control of an army of robots and make him a giant incarnation of malice. Even with all of that, Link can still beat the ever-living crap out of Ganon with a couple of sticks in his underwear. In order to make Zelda feel important in the story, they end up giving her crazy powerful magic. She wipes out hordes of monsters with a single move and then faces off against Ganon by herself after only successfully using her new power once. Then in Tears of the Kingdom, she, spoiler alert, turns into an actual dragon. Again, this is the most powerful version of this character we have ever seen. This leaves a problem though. With the 2 protagonists being the strongest they have ever been in the series, what do you do with the villain? You've already seen the range of powerful human to actual god. This is where I think power scaling in the series is actually harmful to the franchise as a whole. In order to make Ganondorf seem like more of a threat in this game, they destroy the Master Sword. I think it's problematic to disregard important portions of established lore in order to write a scarier villain. The writers for the Zelda franchise tried to outdo themselves over and over again with scale and majesty. This worked well for some time, but I think they are taking it into dangerous territory. If they continue to write conflicts on a greater scale, the scenarios start to become ridiculous. I don't think this power scaling is sustainable. My advice as the greatest YouTuber of all time is to scale it back a bit. Take the story to a more personal level. Make the stakes smaller, but more tied to Link as a person. If not Link, then Zelda. There isn't a need for constantly facing world-ending threats if the threats are deeply rooted to the character you write. What do you think? Is Nintendo leaning too hard into the power scaling of their characters, or am I just a crybaby who should stop making YouTube videos? Let me know in the comments.